Sarah Miller's fingers trembled slightly as she clutched her worn leather purse, the fluorescent lights of the law office humming overhead like hungry mosquitoes. The room smelled of lemon polish and privilege, the mahogany conference table gleaming beneath stacks of important-looking documents. She shifted uncomfortably in the stiff-backed chair, acutely aware of her faded jeans and department store blouse amid the designer suits and dresses adorning her relatives. Victoria, her cousin, sat directly across, manicured nails drumming an impatient rhythm on the polished surface. Her silk blouse probably cost more than Sarah's entire wardrobe. Nathan lounged beside Victoria, his real estate developer confidence evident in his relaxed posture and the gold watch that caught the light with each casual gesture. Aunt Eleanor had positioned herself at the head of the table, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, pearl necklace resting against her cashmere sweater. Uncle Walter completed the tableau of family success, his banker's posture rigid even in retirement, eyes constantly calculating behind wire-rimmed glasses. The wall clock ticked mercilessly forward, 10 minutes late already. Sarah's thoughts drifted to Olivia, her 8-year-old daughter, staying with Mrs. Patel from downstairs. Another $15 she couldn't afford, on top of the gas money to drive across town to this office where she clearly didn't belong. The memory of yesterday's school call intruded, the gentle but firm reminder about Olivia's overdue activity fees. The same day the notice came about the rent increase. The same week her supervisor at the diner cut her hours. The same month her online nursing program payments were due. The door swung open as Thomas Reed entered, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and perfectly pressed suit, carrying a cardboard box labeled William Miller, Personal Effects, in precise handwriting. He arranged his papers with practiced efficiency, cleared his throat, and adjusted his glasses. Welcome, everyone. I'm Thomas Reed, executor of William Miller's estate. I know this is a difficult time, but we're here to honor Mr. Miller's final wishes regarding his assets and possessions. Sarah felt Victoria's eyes sweep over her, lingering on the scuffed boots she'd had resoled twice already. A small, satisfied smile played at the corner of Victoria's mouth as she leaned toward Nathan. The old man probably left her bus fare home. Reed's monotone voice began reciting legal preamble, the formal language washing over the room. Sarah's mind wandered to the parking lot outside, where her 15-year-old Honda sat with the check engine light that had been illuminated for 6 months now. The mechanic wanted $800 she didn't have. The car still ran mostly, though the strange knocking sound when she accelerated past 45 mph had gotten worse last week. Reed's voice sharpened, pulling her attention back to the present. Regarding the distribution of assets, Mr. Miller was quite specific and detailed in his instructions. Sarah watched her relatives straighten in their chairs, Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched expectantly. Nathan's fingers stilled their tapping against the table edge. Uncle Walter removed his glasses to clean them methodically with a monogrammed handkerchief. To my niece, Victoria Collins, I leave my residence at 1421 Oakwood Drive, including all furnishings and household items contained therein. Victoria's face blossomed into a triumphant smile. The Victorian house in the historic district was easily worth over $1 million. She pressed manicured fingertips to her lips in a performance of overwhelmed gratitude that didn't reach her eyes. To my nephew, Nathan Collins, I leave my entire investment portfolio of municipal bonds, currently managed by Fidelity Investments under account number 826444937. Nathan nodded as though he'd expected nothing less. The bonds would generate reliable income for decades, setting him up comfortably without ever touching the principal. To my sister, Eleanor Collins, I establish a trust fund providing annual payments of $50,000 for the remainder of her natural life. Aunt Eleanor dabbed at the corner of her eye with a lace handkerchief, though Sarah couldn't detect actual moisture there. The woman had moved in with William during his final years, claiming she wanted to provide care and companionship, but primarily positioning herself perfectly for this moment. To my brother-in-law, Walter Collins, I bequeath my collection of timepieces, including the Rolex Submariner, the Omega Speedmaster, and the Patek Philippe Calatrava. Uncle Walter's lips thinned into what passed for a smile on his austere face. He had helped William manage his finances for decades and probably knew more about the old man's wealth than anyone else in the room. The watch collection alone could fund a comfortable retirement supplement. With each announcement, Sarah watched her relatives exchange knowing glances and satisfied nods. This division of assets had been telegraphed well in advance, probably during those Sunday visits when Victoria brought fresh-baked cookies and Nathan discussed investment strategies. No one seemed surprised by any of the distributions. Reed paused, shuffled his papers, and adjusted his glasses again. For the first time since the reading began, his expression shifted slightly, revealing what might have been discomfort or perhaps curiosity. And to my granddaughter, Sarah Miller, I leave the contents of envelope 7, which she will find in my personal effects box. The lawyer reached into the cardboard box at his feet and withdrew a plain manila envelope with the number 7 written in William's distinctive cramped handwriting. He slid it across the table towards Sarah with an expression difficult to decipher. Was it pity? Amusement? She couldn't tell. She picked up the envelope, aware that all eyes in the room had suddenly fixed on her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal and looked inside. For a moment, she couldn't process what she was seeing. There had to be some mistake. Inside the envelope was a single $5 bill, wrinkled and faded, looking like it had been folded and unfolded countless times over many years. Beneath it lay a brass key, tarnished with age and attached to a small leather fob that had nearly worn through. That was it. $5 and a key. Sarah stared at the items, her mind racing, trying to understand what kind of message her grandfather was sending from beyond the grave. Was this his final judgment on her life choices? His way of saying she was worth essentially nothing to him? The humiliation started as a hot sensation in her chest and quickly spread upward, coloring her cheeks and making her ears burn. She fought to keep her expression neutral, to not give them the satisfaction of seeing her pain. Then Victoria started laughing. It began as a choked giggle that she tried to suppress behind her hand, quickly escalating into full-throated laughter that shook her entire body. "Oh my God, even Rusty got more than that!" The comment sent the entire room into hysterics. Nathan slapped the table, his face reddening with mirth. Aunt Eleanor hid her smile behind a tissue, pretending to cough, but fooling no one. Uncle Walter didn't even try to hide his amusement, letting out a deep belly laugh that echoed off the office walls. Even Reed's lips twitched upward, though he tried to maintain professional composure. Rusty had been William's ancient golden retriever who had died 2 months before William himself passed. According to the will, Rusty had been left $500 for cremation and a memorial stone, making the dog's inheritance 100 times more generous than Sarah's. Sarah sat frozen in her chair, the $5 bill and key clutched in her hand. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she had tried to maintain a relationship with William, that she had called and written letters that went unanswered, that he was the one who had cut her off when she refused to give up her baby for adoption like he had demanded. But the words stuck in her throat, trapped behind years of hurt and disappointment. Instead, she simply stood up, shoved the envelope and its meager contents into her jacket pocket, and walked toward the door. Behind her, the laughter continued, mixing with snippets of conversation about how typical it was, how Sarah had always been the black sheep, how she had made her bed and now had to lie in it. The autumn air hit her face as she stepped outside, cool and sharp, helping to clear some of the fog from her mind. She walked to her car, the dent in the passenger door, a reminder of the parking lot accident she couldn't afford to repair. The check engine and light greeted her as she started the ignition, a small orange beacon of problems she had to ignore. Sarah sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, not driving, just breathing and trying to process what had just happened. Then she pulled the envelope back out of her pocket and examined its contents more carefully, this time without the pressure of an audience. The $5 bill was old, probably from the 1970s based on the design. It had that soft, worn texture that currency develops after passing through countless hands. There was nothing special about it that she could see, no rare printing errors or collector's marks that might make it valuable. Just $5, which wouldn't even buy her a decent lunch. But the key was different. As she turned it over in her palm, studying it in the better light of late afternoon, she noticed details she had missed in the lawyer's office. The brass had tarnished to a deep bronze green in places, but when she rubbed her thumb across the surface, brighter metal showed through. Along one edge, someone had engraved 2 letters in a scratchy, uneven hand that suggested the work had been done with improvised tools rather than professional equipment. The letters were P and V. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. In Pine Valley, the tiny town where she had spent her childhood summers, where William had worked as a railway station manager before retiring. She hadn't thought about Pine Valley in years, had almost forgotten those long ago days when her mother would drop her off at William's house for weeks at a time when money was tight and childcare was a luxury they couldn't afford. She remembered the old train station, a red brick building with tall windows and a peaked roof that William had loved with an almost religious devotion. He would take her there even on his days off, walking through the empty platforms and telling her stories about the glory days of rail travel, when the station had bustled with activity and the trains had run on time, and people had dressed up for their journeys as though travel itself was something sacred. The station had closed down 20 years ago, victim of budget cuts and changing transportation priorities. Last Sarah had heard, the building was abandoned, surrounded by chain-link fence, and slowly falling into disrepair as weather and vandals took their toll. But William had kept this key. He had kept it for 2 decades, had it engraved with the town's initials, and had specifically left it to her in his will. Why? What was she supposed to do with a key to an abandoned building? Was this some kind of twisted treasure hunt? William's final way of making her work for something he could have simply given her? Or was it meant to be symbolic, a reminder of better times before everything fell apart between them? Sarah started the car, the engine coughing twice before catching, and began the drive back to her apartment. But instead of heading home directly, she found herself driving past her exit and continuing on the highway, heading north toward Pine Valley. It was a 2-hour drive, maybe more with current traffic, and she would have to pay the babysitter extra. But curiosity had taken hold of her mind and wouldn't let go. She needed to understand what William had meant by this inheritance. She needed to know if there was some message or meaning she was supposed to discover, or if this really was just a cruel joke played by a bitter old man who never forgave her for disappointing him. Sarah called Mrs. Patel, explaining she'd be late and asking if Olivia could stay for dinner. She'd pay extra, of course. Mrs. Patel's warm voice reassured her that it was no trouble. Olivia and her daughter Priya were making friendship bracelets and barely noticed the time. The highway stretched out before her, familiar and strange at the same time. How many times had she traveled this route as a child, pressed against the car window, watching the landscape change from urban sprawl to suburban developments, to farmland and forest? Back then, the journey had seemed endless, a magical transition from one world to another. Her mother would drop her at William's small house on the edge of town, kiss her goodbye, and drive back to the city where she worked 2 jobs and went to night school, trying to build a better life for them both. And Sarah would stay with William for weeks at a time, learning to fish in the creek behind his house, helping him tend his vegetable garden, and listening to his stories about the railroad. He had been different back then, or maybe she had been too young to see his flaws and disappointments. William had seemed like a giant to her childhood self, strong and capable, knowing the answer to every question and the solution to every problem. He taught her how to identify different types of trees by their bark and leaves, how to read the clouds to predict weather, how to change a tire and check engine oil, and perform 100 small, practical tasks that seemed mysterious and adult. In the evenings, they would sit on his porch, and he would tell stories about the people who had passed through the station. The businessman who had proposed to his girlfriend on platform 2. The elderly woman who took the same train every week to visit her sister in the next county. The young soldier heading off to war who had left his lucky coin with William for safekeeping. Everything had changed when Sarah turned 17 and came home from a party with news that terrified and transformed her. She was pregnant. The father, a college boy she had dated for 3 months, wanted nothing to do with her or the baby. Her mother, overwhelmed and disappointed, had turned to William for advice. And William, applying the same rigid logic he had used to run his railway station, had presented what he considered the only sensible solution: adoption. Give the baby to a family that could provide properly. Finish high school, go to college, make something of herself instead of throwing her future away on a mistake. William's voice had been calm but unyielding as they sat in his living room that spring afternoon, the scent of lilacs drifting through the open window. A baby needs stability, Sarah. 2 parents, financial security. You're just a child yourself. You can't possibly understand the responsibility. And what about your education? Your future, are you going to throw it all away? For what? Sarah had seen the genuine concern behind his rigid exterior. She recognized that in his own way, he thought he was protecting her. But when she placed her hand on her still flat stomach, she felt something else, a fierce, unexpected certainty. I know this seems crazy to you. I know you think I'm being stubborn and stupid, but this is my baby, mine. And I can't just give it away like it's nothing. I'll figure it out. I'll work. I'll go to school part-time. It'll be hard, but people do hard things every day. His expression had hardened then, a wall coming down between them. His voice dropped to a near whisper. You're making a terrible mistake, one that will follow you for the rest of your life. Sarah, stubborn and scared and somehow certain in a way she couldn't explain, had refused to be moved. She had kept Olivia, dropped out of school to work, and watched her relationship with her grandfather shatter like glass. For the first few years, William had maintained minimal contact, sending birthday cards with $50 bills to Olivia, but never visiting, never calling, never acknowledging Sarah directly. Then even that contact had stopped. Sarah heard about him secondhand through cousins and aunts, who reported on his health and activities, but made it clear that discussing Sarah in his presence was unwelcome. She had tried reaching out several times, writing letters that went unanswered, making phone calls that went straight to voicemail, even driving to Pine Valley once with Olivia in the car seat, hoping that seeing his great-granddaughter in person might soften his heart. But William's housekeeper had answered the door and politely but firmly explained that Mr. Miller was not receiving visitors. Sarah had driven away in tears, Olivia babbling nonsense syllables in the back seat, oblivious to the rejection. Now William was dead, and all she had to show for their relationship was $5 and a tarnished key. Sarah tightened her grip on the steering wheel as the highway began to narrow, two lanes becoming one as she entered the rural area where Pine Valley waited. The town hadn't grown much in the years since she had last visited. If anything, it seemed smaller, the population dwindling as young people moved away for opportunities in larger cities and older residents passed on without replacement. She drove down Main Street, past the old diner where William used to buy her chocolate milkshakes, past the hardware store where he had known every employee by name, past the small library where she had spent rainy afternoons reading while he worked. Many storefronts stood empty now, windows covered with brown paper, for lease signs fading in the sun. Near the town square, Sarah spotted a police cruiser parked in front of what used to be the general store, now converted to a combination post office and community center. She pulled over and cut the engine, deciding to ask for directions. It had been years since she'd visited, and she wasn't entirely sure she remembered the way to the train station. As she approached the cruiser, a man in his mid-60s emerged from the building. His uniform fit his sturdy frame well, the badge on his chest catching the late afternoon sunlight. His hair was silver gray, cut short in military fashion, and deep lines around his eyes suggested a life spent outdoors. "Can I help you, miss? You look a little lost." Sarah hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish about her mission. "I'm looking for the old train station." "Pine Valley Station. Do you know if it's still standing?" The man studied her face for a moment, his expression shifting from polite interest to curiosity. "The station? Nobody's asked about that old place in years. Mind if I ask why you're interested? My grandfather used to work there." "William Miller? He was the station manager before it closed." The man's weathered face broke into a genuine smile, deepening the crow's feet around his eyes. "Will Miller? Well, I'll be. You must be his granddaughter then. Sarah, right?" She nodded, surprised. "You knew him?" "I'm Frank Reynolds. Been chief of police in Pine Valley for going on 30 years now. Your grandfather and I played chess every Thursday at the diner until his health started failing. He was a good man, principled, maybe too stubborn for his own good sometimes, but that's not always a bad quality." Sarah felt an unexpected lump in her throat. It was strange to hear someone speak fondly of William, to be reminded that he had a life and relationships beyond their fractured family connection. Frank tilted his head, studying her. "He talked about you sometimes, you know. Had your picture in his wallet. Grade school photo, I think. Pigtails and missing front teeth." The lump in her throat grew larger. "I didn't know that." Frank nodded, a shadow passing over his features. "Folks can be complicated, especially the ones who grew up in a different time, with different ideas about how things should be. Doesn't mean they don't care." He never seemed to care. Not after I disappointed him. Frank sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his short hair. William had his flaws, like we all do. Thought he knew best about everything. Couldn't bend once his mind was made up. But caring? That wasn't his problem. He cared too much, if anything. Sarah felt a flicker of something. Not quite forgiveness, but perhaps a willingness to consider a more complex picture of the man who had rejected her. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the key. He left me this in his will. Just this and $5. Everyone else got houses and stocks and trust funds. I got this. Frank took the key, examining it carefully. His eyebrows rose as he turned it over and spotted the engraved letters. This looks like a storage room key from the old station. See the number stamped on it? 7, and these letters, PV. William must have added those himself. Sarah nodded. That's what I thought too. That's why I came. Do you know if the station is still accessible? Frank handed the key back, his expression turning serious. The building's still standing, but it's been abandoned for 20 years. Roof's probably not too sound in places. County put up a chain-link fence around it a few years back after some kids broke in and got hurt. I just want to see what this key opens, if there's anything there. Frank studied her for a long moment, and then nodded decisively. Follow me in your car. I'll take you over there. Might be able to help you get inside legally. Technically, the property's condemned, but as chief, I've got some discretion about these things. 10 minutes later, Sarah stood before the Pine Valley station. The red brick building looked smaller than she remembered, shrunken somehow by time and neglect. Chain-link fencing surrounded the property, topped with barbed wire and decorated with faded no trespassing signs. Paint peeled from the window frames. Weeds pushed up through cracks in the parking lot pavement. One of the tall windows on the second floor had been broken, covered now with plywood that had itself begun to rot. This had been William's kingdom once, the place where he had ruled with quiet authority and genuine pride. Now it was just another abandoned building, waiting for demolition or redevelopment, or simply for time to finish its work of erasure. Frank approached the main gate, a heavy padlock securing the chain that held it closed. He pulled out a ring of keys from his belt and selected one. County gave us a set of keys in case of emergency. Fire department has one too. The lock opened with a reluctant clank, and Frank pushed the gate wide enough for them to enter. Inside the fence, the desolation was even more apparent. Discarded fast food wrappers and empty beer cans gathered against the foundation. Graffiti decorated the lower portions of the brick walls. Nature was slowly reclaiming the parking lot, with determined plants pushing through every crack and crevice. The main entrance was boarded up, the grand doors that had once welcomed travelers now hidden behind sheets of weathered plywood. Frank led Sarah around the side of the building, his footsteps sure despite the uneven ground. If your key is for a storage room, we should look for service entrances. The main passenger areas wouldn't have had numbered storage. They circled the building, examining doors and windows, all secured against intruders. Sarah felt disappointment building as each possibility proved fruitless. What had she expected, really? That William would have maintained some secret room in an abandoned building? That there would be something valuable waiting for her after all these years? Maybe the key was just symbolic. William's final way of reminding her of what she had lost when she chose Olivia over his approval. A metaphorical key to a past that could never be reclaimed. Then Frank stopped abruptly, pointing to something Sarah hadn't noticed. On the north side of the station, a set of concrete steps descended below ground level, leading to a door set into the foundation wall. The door was metal, rusted to a mottled orange and brown, with the words Storage 7 stenciled in faded white paint. Sarah's heart began to pound. She descended the steps, her fingers tracing the painted numbers. Could it really be this simple? She inserted the brass key into the lock, feeling resistance as tarnish and time fought against the movement. Then she applied pressure, turning the key slowly, hearing the internal mechanisms click and grind. Suddenly, the lock gave way with a satisfying thunk. Sarah looked up at Frank, her eyes wide with surprise and renewed hope. He nodded encouragingly, his hand moving to rest on his service weapon, a precaution against whatever might be waiting inside. The door opened inward with a protesting creak of hinges that hadn't moved in years. Sarah pulled out her phone and activated the flashlight function, shining it into the gloom. The beam revealed a small room, perhaps 10 feet by 12 feet, with concrete walls and a floor that had collected 2 decades worth of dust. In the center of the room sat a single item that made her breath catch. It was a trunk, the old-fashioned kind with metal reinforcements and leather straps, exactly like something from a movie about pirates or Victorian explorers. The trunk was covered in dust so thick it looked like gray fur, but underneath she could see dark wood and brass fittings that matched her key. Sarah stepped into the storage room, her phone light casting strange shadows on the walls, and approached the trunk with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Frank followed, keeping close but allowing her this moment of discovery. The trunk wasn't locked, which surprised her. After all the security to get into this room, she had expected the trunk itself to require another key or combination. But the leather straps simply unbuckled, stiff with age but still functional, and the lid lifted with a creak of old hinges. Inside, protected from time and moisture by the trunk's surprisingly good seal, Sarah found layers of documents and objects that represented some part of William's life she had never known existed. On top lay several leather-bound journals, their covers embossed with dates ranging from 1972 to 1998. Beneath the journals were manila folders stuffed with papers, legal documents with impressive seals and signatures, and what looked like stock certificates from another era. Sarah pulled out the first journal and opened it carefully, afraid the old paper might crumble at her touch. But the pages were still intact, covered in William's distinctive, cramped handwriting. The entries were dated starting in January of 1972, when William would have been in his early 30s. She read the first entry by the light of her phone, squinting at the faded ink. January 3rd, 1972. Met with James Thompson and Robert Garcia today to discuss our proposal. The station authority keeps refusing our request for modernization, claiming budget constraints while they waste money on administrative overhead. We have decided to move forward with private funding. If they won't fix the system, we will build our own. Our company shall be called Pine Valley Transit Solutions. Sarah flipped through more pages, her excitement growing as the story revealed itself. William hadn't just been a station manager. He had been an entrepreneur, a visionary who saw problems and created solutions. Along with 2 partners, he had founded a small transportation company focused on freight logistics, starting with contracts to move goods between rural towns that larger companies ignored as unprofitable. The journals documented their struggles and successes. The near bankruptcy in 1974, the major contract breakthrough in 1976, the expansion into 3 states by 1980. William's writing revealed a side of him Sarah had never imagined, someone who took calculated risks and believed in possibilities rather than just maintaining existing systems. She set the journals aside and examined the manila folders. The first contained incorporation documents for Pine Valley Transit Solutions, showing William, James Thompson, and Robert Garcia as equal partners with 1/3 ownership each. Another folder held contracts and business correspondence, proposals sent to potential clients, and responses that tracked their growing success. A third folder made Sarah's hands shake as she pulled out its contents. These were stock certificates, beautifully printed documents that looked almost like currency. But these weren't ordinary stock certificates from publicly traded companies. These represented William's ownership stake in Pine Valley Transit Solutions, carefully preserved and apparently never sold. Frank whistled softly as he peered over her shoulder. Would you look at that? I always wondered how Will managed to retire so comfortably on a station manager's pension. Turns out the old fox had a whole other life none of us knew about. Sarah nodded absently, still trying to process this revelation. Deeper in the trunk, she found more recent documents that began to tell a bigger story. In '97, Pine Valley Transit Solutions had merged with a larger logistics company called Western Transport. The merger documents explained that all 3 original partners would receive substantial shares in the new combined company, which would retain the specialized rural service routes that Pine Valley Transit had pioneered while benefiting from Western Transport's capital and infrastructure. William's journal entry from that year was surprisingly emotional, given his usually reserved writing style. March 12, 1997. We signed the papers today. 25 years of work transformed into something larger than we ever imagined. James is talking about retirement. Robert wants to stay on as a consultant. I find myself uncertain. The station here closes next year. made obsolete by the very success of the freight business we built. Perhaps it is time for me to step back as well, let younger minds guide what comes next. But the most important documents came from the bottom of the trunk, dated within the last 5 years. Sarah found correspondence between William and various corporate attorneys discussing the ongoing performance of his shares in what Western Transport had become. The company had changed names again, rebranding as Alpine Logistics after another merger in 2005. And Alpine Logistics, according to the financial statements Sarah was now reading by the increasingly dim light of her phone battery, had grown into a billion-dollar enterprise with operations across 12 states and partnerships with major retailers for their supply chain management. The most recent statement, from just 6 months before William's death, showed his holdings valued at $18.7 million. Sarah had to sit down on the dusty floor, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. $18.7 million. Her grandfather, the man who had lived modestly in a small house and driven a 10-year-old pickup truck and always seemed to be counting pennies, had been worth nearly $20 million. And he had hidden it, told no one, lived as though he was just another retired railway worker surviving on his pension. Why? What possible reason could he have had for such secrecy? She searched through more documents, looking for answers, and finally found a letter tucked into one of the journals. The envelope was addressed to Sarah, written in William's handwriting, sealed but not mailed. Her name on the front looked like it had been written and rewritten, the ink showing multiple attempts to get it right. With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the envelope and pulled out several sheets of paper covered in William's cramped script. The letter was dated 2 months before his death. "Sarah," it began, "if you are reading this, then you have figured out what the key was for. I am proud of you for that, though I wish I could have said so in person. I know you must have questions about why I did things this way, why I gave you so little in the will reading while giving your cousins so much. The truth is, I gave them exactly what they deserved, which is to say, I gave them things that will make them comfortable but not transformative, gifts that match the depth of their character. But I gave you a test. I gave you a puzzle that required curiosity and persistence to solve. I gave you a key to something valuable, but only if you were willing to do the work to discover its worth." The letter continued, William's handwriting becoming shakier as he wrote, as though the physical act of forming words was increasingly difficult. "I was wrong about you, Sarah. I was wrong about so many things. When you told me you were keeping Olivia, I thought you were throwing your life away out of stubbornness and stupidity. I thought you were too young to understand the sacrifice you were making. I thought I knew better, that my years and experience gave me wisdom you lacked. But I was the one who lacked wisdom. I was the one who could not see that sometimes the hard choice is the right choice, that sometimes love requires sacrifice, that sometimes strength means standing firm against the whole world's judgment. You kept your daughter when everyone, including me, told you to give her up. You worked multiple jobs and went to school and raised a child alone, and you never once complained or asked for handouts or gave up. You are stronger and braver than I ever was." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now, dripping onto the letter and smearing some of the ink. William's words continued, "I started Pine Valley Transit because I saw a problem that needed solving, and I had the audacity to believe I could fix it. I spent 25 years building something that mattered, something that helped people, and created jobs and made the world slightly better than I found it. And then I spent another 25 years watching that success grow beyond anything I had imagined, all while living like I had nothing because I wanted to see who in my family would love me for myself rather than for my money. Your cousins visited for the inheritance they assumed was coming. Your aunt moved in to position herself for whatever she could grab. Even your uncle, who I trusted with my finances, was constantly suggesting ways to make my wealth more accessible to the family. But you stayed away. You respected my boundaries even when those boundaries hurt you. You never asked for money, never hinted at need, never suggested that I owed you anything. And that told me everything I needed to know about your character." The letter went on, explaining the legal arrangements William had made. "The stocks and shares documented in this trunk are yours, Sarah. Everything Alpine Logistics owes to William Miller now belongs to you. I have arranged with my attorney, the real one, not Reed, who only handled the minor bequests, to transfer these holdings to your name upon proof of discovery. The key and the $5 bill were your proof. The $5 was the amount I had in my pocket the day I started Pine Valley Transit, the last of my savings after I had invested everything else in the company. I kept that bill as a reminder that real wealth starts with courage, not capital. I hope it serves as a reminder to you as well. Use this inheritance wisely. Use it to finish your education, to provide for Olivia, to build the life you deserve. But more than that, use it to do what I did. Find a problem that needs solving and have the audacity to believe you can fix it. The world needs more people like you, people who choose the hard right over the easy wrong, people who sacrifice for others without expectation of reward. The letter ended with a simple signature, William Miller, and a postscript that made Sarah sob openly. I love you, Sarah. I should have said that more often when I had the chance. I should have said it when you were a little girl helping me in the garden. I should have said it when you came to me pregnant and scared. I should have said it every day of your life. Please forgive an old man who learned too late that love matters more than being right. Please tell Olivia about her great-grandfather and tell her that he was proud of both of you, even if he was too stubborn to show it properly. Sarah sat in that dusty storage room for a long time, crying and reading the letter again and again, trying to absorb the magnitude of what she had discovered. Her inheritance wasn't $5. It was close to $20 million, plus the emotional validation she had craved for a decade. The acknowledgement that her choices had been right, that her sacrifices had meant something, that the grandfather who had seemed to reject her had actually been watching and understanding all along. Frank stood quietly nearby, offering the silent compassion of someone who understood that some moments require witness, but not words. Eventually, Sarah's phone battery warning brought her back to practical reality. She carefully repacked the trunk, making sure all the documents were secure, then closed and latched it. We'll need help moving this, she said, her voice rough from crying. And I'll need to contact the attorney William mentioned. But first, her voice broke slightly. I need to get back to my daughter. Frank nodded, understanding in his weathered features. I'll help you secure this room for now. Come back tomorrow with proper transportation. I'll arrange for a couple of my deputies to assist with the heavy lifting. That trunk isn't going anywhere tonight. As they locked the storage room behind them, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. The anger and hurt she had carried for so many years hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something more complex, a bittersweet understanding that people can be both deeply flawed and deeply loving, that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, and that some inheritances are measured not in dollars but in values passed from one generation to the next. The drive back to the city passed in a blur of thoughts and emotions. She thought about William, about the complexity of his character and the depth of his planning. She thought about her cousins, who would soon discover that their inheritances were generous, but nowhere near what they had expected, that the real wealth had gone elsewhere. She thought about Victoria's laughter in the lawyer's office, and the irony that the thing they had mocked was actually the key to a fortune that made their bequests look trivial. But mostly she thought about Olivia, about the opportunities this inheritance would create, about the education and security and possibilities that were now within reach. And she thought about the $5 bill, William's reminder that real wealth starts with courage, not capital, the audacity to believe you can solve problems that others ignore, the strength to choose the hard right over the easy wrong. As Sarah pulled into her apartment complex parking lot, she realized that William had given her not just financial security, but something even more valuable, a blueprint for living with purpose and integrity. The real inheritance wasn't the money, it was the challenge to use that money wisely, to find problems that needed solving, to make the world slightly better than she found it. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs to Mrs. Patel's apartment, suddenly eager to hold her daughter, to tell her about the great-grandfather who had finally, in his own stubborn way, found the words to say he was proud of them both. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and financial advisors and 1,000 practical details. But tonight was for stories and healing, and the quiet certainty that sometimes when you choose love over convenience, the universe finds ways to confirm you were right all along. Sunrise painted the apartment walls a soft amber as Sarah finished explaining everything to Olivia. The 8-year-old sat cross-legged on their worn couch, still in her unicorn pajamas, wide-eyed as her mother showed her the brass key and the $5 bill. Great-Grandpa William left us a secret treasure? Olivia bounced slightly, her dark ponytail bobbing with excitement. Like pirates? Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair, marveling at the uncomplicated joy children could find, even in complicated situations. Not exactly pirates, but yes, a kind of treasure. We need to go back to Pine Valley today to get it. I've already called Mrs. Patel to see if you can stay with her again. Olivia's face fell instantly. Her small hands gripped Sarah's wrist. I want to come with you. Please. I've never even seen where Great-Grandpa lived. And you said there's a real old train station. Please, Mom. Sarah hesitated. The practical part of her mind cataloged all the reasons to leave Olivia behind. The abandoned building could be dangerous. The documents were complicated. The day would be long. But something in her daughter's earnest expression reminded her of William's letter. Tell Olivia about her great-grandfather. You can come, but you have to promise to stay close and follow instructions. Some parts of that old building might not be safe. Olivia launched herself into Sarah's arms, nearly knocking her backward. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll be super careful, I promise. The drive to Pine Valley felt different in daylight, with Olivia chattering excitedly beside her. The check engine light still glowed on the dashboard, but somehow it seemed less threatening now. They stopped at a drive-thru for breakfast, a rare treat that Olivia met with wide-eyed appreciation. Sarah called Frank while they ate, arranging to meet him at the station. He promised to bring help for moving the trunk and secure transportation to get it back to the city. As they drove, Sarah explained to Olivia about William, not just the stern old man who had disappeared from their lives, but the younger version who had taught Sarah to fish and garden, who had seen a broken system and built something better. The landscape shifted gradually from suburbs to farmland, barns and silos appearing like sentinels along the highway. Olivia pressed her nose against the window, watching cows graze in green pastures. Mom, do you think Great-Grandpa was trying to play a game with us? Like a scavenger hunt? Sarah considered this perspective. William's actions viewed through a child's imaginative lens rather than an adult's wounded one. Maybe in a way. I think he wanted to see if I was curious enough, persistent enough to solve his puzzle. The question illuminated William's actions differently. Not just a test of character, but an invitation to demonstrate qualities he himself had valued. Curiosity, determination, willingness to venture into the unknown. The same qualities that had led him to start Pine Valley Transit when everyone else accepted the broken status quo. Pine Valley appeared on the horizon, looking somewhat less forlorn in the morning light. A few more businesses appeared open than Sarah had noticed yesterday. A cafe with a hand-painted sign, a small grocery store with produce displayed on sidewalk stands, a hardware store with rocking chairs arranged invitingly on the porch. Frank's police cruiser waited in front of the station, along with a battered blue pickup truck. As Sarah parked, Frank emerged from the cruiser, accompanied by a younger officer carrying bolt cutters and work gloves. Beside the truck stood a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 60s with weathered skin and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of physical labor. Frank gestured toward them as Sarah and Olivia approached. This is Officer Martinez. He'll help with security and the heavy lifting. And this is Tom Matthews, best carpenter in the county and an old friend of your grandfather's. Thought he might be helpful given the condition of that place. Tom extended a hand towards Sarah, his grip firm but careful. Will and I played chess every Thursday for 20 years. He mentioned you sometimes. Said you had his stubborn streak. The unexpected connection to William sent a warm current through Sarah's chest. She hadn't known about the chess games, this entire social world her grandfather had inhabited that remained invisible to the family. Olivia stepped forward, her small hand extended with formal precision. I'm Olivia Miller. Did you know my mom when she was little? Tom's weathered face creased with a smile as he shook her hand with ceremonial gravity. Can't say that I did, Miss Olivia, but your great-grandfather showed me your school picture once. Said you had the Miller eyes. Frank led them through the gate, which now stood permanently open, the padlock removed. The morning light revealed new details about the station Sarah hadn't noticed in yesterday's fading dusk. Elaborate brickwork around the windows, decorative cornices below the roofline, the faded outline where the station's name had once been mounted above the main entrance. Tom ran his hand along the brick exterior, his expression professional and assessing. Solid construction. They built things to last back then. Foundation looks good despite the neglect. Roof's the main concern. See those water stains along the west wall? Been leaking for years, I'd guess. They made their way to the storage room entrance, the concrete steps now clearly visible in daylight. Frank had already cleared away the accumulated debris, making the descent safer. The rusted door stood partially open, exactly as they had left it the previous evening. Officer Martinez positioned himself at the entrance, keeping watch as the others entered. The small room appeared transformed in Sarah's phone flashlight beam, less mysterious than yesterday but no less significant. The trunk waited in the center, dusty and imposing, its brass fittings gleaming dully where Sarah had touched them. Tom whistled softly as he examined the trunk. That's fine craftsmanship, cedar-lined, if I'm not mistaken. Keeps the moths out, controls humidity. Your grandfather knew what he was doing, storing documents in this. Frank and Tom carefully lifted the trunk, testing its weight before attempting to move it. Officer Martinez joined them, and together the three men carried it up the concrete steps and across the overgrown parking lot to Tom's truck. They secured it with ropes and a tarp, protection against both weather and curious eyes. As the men worked, Olivia tugged at Sarah's sleeve, pointing toward the boarded-up main entrance. Can we look inside the station? Please, just for a minute? Sarah hesitated, glancing toward Frank, who was supervising the trunk securing. Is it safe to go inside the main building? Frank scratched his chin thoughtfully. First floor should be okay if we're careful. Watch for rotted floorboards. Stick to the edges of rooms where the support beams are strongest. Tom produced a crowbar from his truck. Let me get that plywood off one of the side doors. Safer than the main entrance. Those big doors might have warped on their hinges. Minutes later, they stood inside what had once been the station's main waiting room. Dust motes danced in shafts of light that penetrated through gaps in the boarded windows. The high ceiling featured ornate moldings, now draped with cobwebs. Wooden benches, bolted to the floor, formed rows across the center space, their varnish dulled by years of disuse. Olivia moved cautiously as instructed, but her eyes were wide with wonder. It's like a castle. It's like a... Her whisper echoed slightly in the empty space. Sarah could almost see it as it had been. Polished floors instead of dust-covered planks. The ticket counter with its brass grills instead of an empty wall. Passengers waiting with suitcases instead of shadows cast by broken furniture. This had been William's domain, the place where he had developed the exacting standards and attention to detail that had later served him in business. Frank pointed toward a door at the far end of the waiting room. That was Will's office. Station manager had a private space to handle paperwork, scheduling, that sort of thing. They picked their way carefully across the floor, stepping where Frank indicated was safest. The office door stood partially ajar, its frosted glass window still bearing the faded letters Station Manager in gold leaf. Inside, the room was smaller than Sarah had expected, perhaps 12 feet square. A desk faced the door, positioned to give its occupant a view through the office window into the main waiting area. Bookshelves lined one wall, empty now except for a few moldering railway timetables. A large wall map of the regional rail system hung behind the desk, routes marked in different colors, many of them discontinued decades ago. Tom approached the desk, running his hand along its surface reverently. Solid oak. Will offered to buy this when they closed the station, but they refused. Said all furnishings had to be auctioned. He was pretty sore about that. Sarah tried to imagine William sitting here, meticulously recording arrivals and departures, managing the small staff, solving the countless daily problems that arose. How had he made the leap from reliable bureaucrat to risk-taking entrepreneur? What had sparked that transformation? Olivia had wandered to the bookshelves, examining the few remaining items with careful fingers. She reached for something on a lower shelf, partially hidden behind a fallen timetable. Hey, Mom, look at this. She held up a metal toolbox, green paint flaking from its surface. The handle worn smooth from years of use. The initials WM had been stamped into the metal on its front. Tom's eyebrows rose in recognition. That's Will's old toolbox. He always kept it here to fix things around the station. Said the maintenance budget was never enough, so he learned to do repairs himself. Sarah took the box carefully, feeling its substantial weight. The latches were stiff but functional. Inside, tools nestled in precise organization. Screwdrivers with wooden handles, a small hammer, wrenches of various sizes, a folding ruler, all meticulously maintained despite their age. These were the tools William had used to teach her basic repairs, patiently demonstrating how to tighten a loose cabinet hinge or replace a washer in a leaky faucet. His voice seemed to echo in her memory. If you understand how something works, you are never helpless when it breaks. Frank checked his watch. We should get moving if we want to meet with Michael Bennett today. He called his office while you were inside. He can see us at 2 o'clock. They made their way back through the waiting room, Sarah carrying William's toolbox, unwilling to leave this personal connection behind. As they reached the side door, Olivia stopped suddenly, her head tilted in concentration. Mom, did you hear that? Everyone froze, listening. A faint creaking sound came from somewhere above them, followed by what might have been footsteps. Frank motioned for quiet, his hand moving toward his weapon. The building's supposed to be empty. Officer Martinez immediately positioned himself between the sound and Olivia, his posture alert but calm. Tom pointed toward a door partly hidden beneath the grand staircase that once led to the second floor. Service stairs. Less likely to be damaged. I'll check it out. Frank shook his head firmly. Police matter. Martinez, secure the exit. Tom, get Sarah and Olivia to the vehicles. Sarah put her arm around Olivia's shoulders, feeling her daughter's body tense with apprehension. Frank and Officer Martinez moved with practiced coordination, communicating with hand signals as they approached the service door. The creaking sound came again. Definitely footsteps now, moving across the ceiling above them. Frank called out, his voice authoritative. Pine Valley Police, identify yourself. The footsteps quickened, moving toward the back of the building. Frank and Martinez disappeared through the service door, their cautious ascent audible in the quiet building. Tom ushered Sarah and Olivia toward the exit, his body positioned protectively. He'd make a fine sentry, Sarah thought. His height and broad shoulders created a feeling of security despite the uncertainty of the situation. Outside in the sunlight, the abandoned station's foreboding atmosphere dissipated somewhat. They waited by the vehicles, Olivia clutching Sarah's hand tightly. Is Chief Frank going to be okay? Before Sarah could answer, a commotion erupted at the far end of the building. 2 teenage boys burst from a partially broken window on the second floor, landing clumsily on an overgrown patch of ground. They scrambled to their feet and froze at the sight of Sarah, Tom, and Olivia standing by the police cruiser. Frank's voice boomed from the window they'd just escaped through. Stay right there! The boys, perhaps 15 or 16 years old, wearing hoodies despite the warm day, exchanged panicked glances before raising their hands in surrender. Minutes later, Frank and Martinez emerged from the side door, escorting the teenagers with firm but gentle guidance. Just local kids using the place as a hangout. They ran when they heard us, thought we were rival kids trying to claim their spot. The taller boy's face burned with embarrassment as he glanced toward Olivia, clearly mortified to be caught by a child half his age. Frank checked their school IDs before delivering a stern but compassionate lecture about trespassing and unsafe buildings. Instead of arrest, he assigned community service, helping Tom with an upcoming restoration project at the town's historical society. As the boys shuffled away, visibly relieved to escape more serious consequences, Frank turned to Sarah with a rueful smile. That's policing in Pine Valley, mostly keeping bored teenagers out of trouble. With the excitement over, they secured the station and formed a small convoy toward the center of town. Frank's cruiser leading, followed by Sarah's Honda, with Tom's truck carrying the precious trunk bringing up the rear. They parked in front of a modest 2-story building on Main Street with a brass plaque identifying it as the law offices of Bennett and Associates. Inside, the reception area featured wood paneling and leather furniture that had been fashionable 3 decades earlier. A woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and reading glasses looked up from an actual paper appointment book. Chief Reynolds, right on time. Mr. Bennett is expecting you. She led them down a short hallway to a corner office where Michael Bennett waited. Unlike Thomas Reed with his sterile professionalism, Bennett exuded the comfortable authority of a small-town attorney who had known most of his clients since birth. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine beneath a neatly trimmed white mustache. I've been wondering when you'd come. William said you would eventually. He was quite confident in your ability to solve his little puzzle. Sarah introduced Olivia, who performed her formal handshake ritual again, earning an approving nod from Bennett. He gestured for them to sit while Frank and Tom went to retrieve the trunk from the truck. William came to me about 5 years ago to begin setting this up. Quite an elaborate arrangement. The man had a flair for the dramatic when he wanted to. But he was adamant about one thing: his fortune should go to the person who valued relationships over money, the person who showed character when tested. Bennett's office window overlooked the town square, where a few elderly residents sat on benches beneath maple trees. He watched as Frank and Tom carefully carried the trunk into the building. The legal structure William created is somewhat unusual but entirely sound. Upon presentation of the key and the $5 bill, accompanied by the trunk's contents as verification, his Alpine Logistics holdings transferred directly to you, bypassing probate entirely. The smaller bequests handled by Thomas Reed were essentially a smokescreen, valuable enough that no one would question them, but a fraction of William's true worth. Frank and Tom entered with the trunk, placing it carefully on a large table Bennett had cleared for this purpose. Sarah showed Bennett the key and the $5 bill, then opened the trunk to display the documents. Bennett spent nearly an hour examining the contents, occasionally making notes or comparing documents to files he retrieved from a cabinet. His methodical approach reminded Sarah of William: the same attention to detail, the same careful verification of facts. Everything appears to be in order. William's instructions were very specific. Once you found the trunk and presented its contents to me, I was to contact James Carson at Alpine Logistics and initiate the transfer of William's holdings to your name. I took the liberty of arranging that meeting for tomorrow morning, assuming you'd solve the puzzle this week. The casual confidence in her abilities, both Bennett's and William's, struck Sarah deeply. While her family had been laughing at her $5 inheritance, these men had been waiting patiently, certain she would rise to William's challenge. Bennett explained the financial implications with careful precision. As majority shareholder of William's holdings, she would receive quarterly dividends of approximately $250,000 before taxes. She would have voting rights on the company's board, though she was under no obligation to exercise them personally. The shares themselves had a current market value of $18.7 million, but fluctuated with the company's performance. The magnitude of these numbers existed in a realm beyond Sarah's experience. Her entire financial life had been a careful dance of prioritizing bills, stretching groceries, and maintaining just enough in her checking account to avoid overdraft fees. Now Bennett was casually discussing quarterly payments larger than her lifetime earnings. Olivia, remarkably patient during the financial discussion, finally piped up with the question that truly mattered to an 8-year-old. Does this mean Mom doesn't have to work at the diner anymore? The simple inquiry crystallized the immediate impact of their changed circumstances, bringing Sarah back from abstract millions to concrete realities. No more double shifts that left her exhausted. No more missing school events because she couldn't afford to lose the hours. No more choosing between paying the electric bill and buying Olivia new shoes. Bennett smiled at Olivia with grandfatherly warmth. That's entirely up to your mother, young lady, but I would say she has options now that she didn't have yesterday. Options. The word hung in the air like a promise. Not just financial options, but life options. The freedom to make choices based on desire rather than necessity, on purpose rather than survival. As the meeting concluded, Bennett handed Sarah a thick envelope containing initial paperwork, legal notifications, and his detailed instructions for the next steps. He's arranged for a secure courier service to transport the trunk to a bank vault in the city until more permanent arrangements could be made. Your grandfather chose well, Sarah. Not everyone would have pursued that key's meaning. Many would have dismissed it as a final insult and moved on. The fact that you came looking shows him exactly what he wanted to know, that you have the same spirit he did, the same determination to find answers and solve problems. Outside Bennett's office, they found Tom deep in conversation with a man they hadn't met, tall and distinguished in his early 60s, with silver-streaked black hair and a tailored suit that spoke of urban success rather than small-town comfort. James Carson, Frank explained quietly. Former CFO of Western Transport, now senior advisor to Alpine Logistics. Word travels fast in Pine Valley. Carson approached with the confident stride of a corporate executive, tempering his handshake to match Sarah's more tentative grip. I worked with your grandfather for nearly 20 years. Brilliant man, saw opportunities where others saw only obstacles. When Michael called this morning to say you'd found the trunk, I drove straight from Chicago. His presence made the inheritance feel suddenly more real, a connection to the corporate world that had generated William's wealth, a living bridge between her grandfather's business activities and her own unexpected future. Carson suggested they continue their conversation over lunch at the town's only restaurant, a diner called Rosie's that Sarah remembered from childhood visits. As they walked the short distance down Main Street, Olivia skipping ahead with Frank, Carson filled the space with memories of William, the businessman. Your grandfather had this remarkable ability to identify inefficient systems. Where most people saw, that's just how things are done, William saw opportunities for improvement. When the major shipping companies ignored rural routes as unprofitable, he built an entire business model around serving those communities. Everyone thought he was crazy until the profits started rolling in. Rosie's Diner had changed little in 20 years. The same vinyl booths, formica tables, and rotating pie display. The owner, a woman in her 70s who must be Rosie herself, recognized Frank immediately and shuffled over to greet them, her eyes widening when Carson introduced Sarah. You're Will Miller's granddaughter? Well, I'll be. He sat at that corner booth every morning for 30 years. Always ordered the same thing. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee. Never tipped less than 25%, even back when that wasn't common. The casual revelation of William's daily habits, his breakfast preferences, his tipping practices, added another dimension to Sarah's expanding understanding of her grandfather. Not just the stern patriarch who had rejected her choices, not just the secret business genius who had amassed millions, but a creature of routine who valued consistency and generosity in small daily interactions. They settled into a large corner booth, ordering comfort food that arrived quickly on heavy ceramic plates. Carson waited until they were settled before broaching the business implications of Sarah's inheritance. Alpine Logistics has grown substantially since the merger with Western Transport. We're now one of the top 10 freight logistics companies in the Midwest, with specialized divisions handling everything from small package rural delivery to major retail supply chains. Williams shares represent approximately 17% of the company, not controlling interest, but certainly enough to have a significant voice in major decisions. Olivia focused intently on arranging her French fries in precise rows, but her ears were clearly tuned to the adult conversation. Sarah wondered how much her daughter understood of these discussions, how this sudden wealth might shape her understanding of the world. Carson continued his explanation, detailing board meetings, voting procedures, and dividend structures. Your grandfather attended exactly one board meeting a year, the annual shareholders meeting, and voted by proxy the rest of the time. He had no interest in day-to-day operations once he retired. His philosophy was to hire good people, give them clear objectives, and let them do their jobs without micromanagement. The approach sounded nothing like the controlling, rigid man who had demanded Sarah give up her baby. Had William applied different standards to business and family? Or had age changed him, softened his insistence on controlling outcomes? Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by the diner door opening with a bang. Victoria Collins stood in the entrance, her designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly styled hair, her expression shifting from determination to shock as she surveyed the occupied corner booth. Sarah felt her body tense, her hand instinctively moving toward Olivia in a protective gesture. Victoria's presence in Pine Valley could not be coincidence. Someone had talked, information had leaked. The secret inheritance had already escaped the small circle of those who knew. Victoria approached their table, her stiletto heels clicking aggressively against the linoleum floor. Well, isn't this cozy? A little family reunion in this charming establishment. She emphasized the word with barely disguised disdain, her gaze sweeping over the diner's worn furnishings. Frank half rose from his seat, his position of authority in the town evident in his posture. Ms. Collins, this is a surprise. What brings you to Pine Valley? Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. Uncle Walter had some interesting calls from old contacts at the bank this morning. Something about preparations for a large asset transfer from grandfather's estate. Imagine our surprise when your name kept coming up, Sarah. After your heartbreaking $5 inheritance, suddenly you're meeting with financial advisors. Sarah felt rather than saw Carson and Bennett exchange glances. Information moved quickly in financial circles. Perhaps William should have used different banks for his personal and business finances. Victoria leaned down, her manicured hands flat on the table, voice lowered to a stage whisper. We're family, Sarah. Whatever you've found, whatever this is about, surely we can discuss it reasonably. Without lawyers, without outsiders. Her gaze flicked meaningfully toward Frank and Carson. The old Sarah might have folded under that presumptuous pressure, might have sought peace at any cost. But William's letter had fortified something in her, a recognition that her boundaries deserved respect, that her judgment had been proven sound. This isn't the time or place, Victoria. If you'd like to discuss this properly, you can contact Michael Bennett. He's handling all legal matters regarding grandfather's estate. Victoria straightened, her expression hardening. Don't be difficult, Sarah. You've always been emotional rather than practical. Whatever grandfather left you, it's clearly substantial. We just want to ensure family assets are properly managed. You're hardly qualified to handle significant financial matters. Before Sarah could respond, Olivia looked up from her French fries, her young voice clear and unintimidated. My mom is smart. She works really hard and goes to school at night and helps me with my homework even when she's tired. Great-grandpa William thought she was the best one. That's why he picked her. Victoria's face flushed at being challenged by a child. Carson smoothly intervened, his corporate diplomacy evident in his measured tone. Ms. Collins, I've worked with Alpine Logistics and its predecessor companies for over 20 years. William Miller was quite explicit about his wishes regarding his business holdings. If you have concerns, Mr. Bennett is indeed the appropriate channel for communication. The mention of Alpine Logistics visibly startled Victoria, her composure cracking further. She hadn't known about the company connection. She'd followed rumors of money, not understanding the source or scale. Sarah stood, meeting her cousin's gaze directly. I'll call you next week after I've had time to process everything. We can talk then, properly, without creating a scene. The dismissal was gentle but firm. Victoria wavered, clearly torn between pressing her advantage and maintaining her dignity in public. Finally, she nodded curtly and turned on her heel, leaving the diner with the same dramatic flourish with which she'd entered. Frank watched through the window as she climbed into a rented luxury sedan. Been planning this ambush all morning, I'd guess. Drove straight from the city when she got wind something was happening. The confrontation left an uneasy residue, like a storm front passing but not quite dissipating. Carson signaled for the check, his expression concerned. This is just the beginning. Once the asset transfer becomes public knowledge, which it will despite our best efforts, you'll face more than just family pressure. Financial advisors, investment managers, charitable organizations, everyone will have ideas about what you should do with your newfound wealth. The remainder of lunch passed with practical discussions about immediate security concerns, financial privacy measures, and the meeting scheduled for tomorrow at Alpine Logistics headquarters. As they prepared to leave, Tom approached their table, having been silent through much of the meal. Before you head back to the city, there's something else at the station you might want to see. In Will's office. I noticed it earlier, but didn't want to mention it with all the excitement about those kids. Back at the station, Tom led them straight to the office they had explored earlier. This time, he moved behind the desk, kneeling to examine the right-hand corner of the room where the wainscoting met the floor. Will and I used to play chess in here after hours. One evening, he dropped a knight, and it rolled into this corner. That's when I noticed this. Tom's weathered fingers pressed against what appeared to be a solid piece of decorative molding. A small section clicked and swung outward, revealing a hidden compartment built into the wall. Will said every station manager since 1910 had used this to store important papers away from prying eyes. Railway business secrets, I suppose. Never told me what he kept in here. Sarah knelt beside him, Olivia crowding eagerly at her shoulder. The compartment was shallow but wide, extending perhaps 18 inches along the wall. Inside lay a single leather portfolio, dust-free despite the years, the leather supple and well-maintained. Sarah lifted it carefully, placing it on the desk to examine its contents. Inside, she found architectural drawings, professional blueprints for a building labeled Pine Valley Community Center. The plan showed the train station completely renovated, its waiting room transformed into a multi-purpose space, offices converted to classrooms, new construction extending from the back to provide additional facilities. The drawings were dated 20 years ago, shortly after the station had closed. In the corner of each page, William's distinctive initials approved the designs. Tom peered over Sarah's shoulder, his expression softening with recognition. He talked about this sometimes during our chess games. His dream project, turning the abandoned station into something useful for the community, had it all planned out right down to the color of the floor tiles. But the county wouldn't sell him the building then, said they had other development plans that never materialized. Sarah flipped through page after page of detailed plans, electrical systems, plumbing, classroom layouts, accessibility features. This wasn't a vague idea or casual interest. William had invested significant time and money developing comprehensive plans for this transformation. A loose sheet slipped from between the blueprints, a handwritten list of potential services the community center might offer. After-school programs, job training for single parents, free childcare during job interviews, GED preparation classes, financial literacy workshops, senior activities. The focus on single parents jumped from the page, a pointed connection to Sarah's own struggles. Had William been thinking of her when he conceived this project, even as he maintained his rigid silence? Had his community center dream been his way of addressing the very challenges she faced, even while his pride prevented direct reconciliation? Olivia had wandered to the large wall map while the adults examined the blueprints. Her small finger traced the colored lines representing long-discontinued rail routes. "Mom, look what I found!" She was pointing to a small notation in the map's legend, easily overlooked. In the same distinctive handwriting that had labeled Envelope 7, William had penciled a note. Pine Valley Transit Solutions. Initial routes, 1972. 3 of the minor rail lines had been circled in red pencil. These were the rural routes the major companies had abandoned. The inefficient connections William and his partners had identified as their first business opportunity. The map captured the very beginning of his entrepreneurial journey, the moment when observation transformed into action. Frank checked his watch, his expression apologetic. "We should head back to the city soon if you're going to prepare for tomorrow's meeting. Rush hour traffic gets nasty after 4. Sarah carefully returned the blueprints to their portfolio, adding it to the items they would take back. William's toolbox, the community center plans, physical connections to the grandfather she was only now beginning to understand. As they secured the station once more, she took a final look at the building, seeing it now not as a decaying relic, but as a vessel of possibility, waiting for new purpose. The journey back to the city passed in thoughtful conversation, Olivia eventually drifting to sleep against Sarah's shoulder in the back seat of Frank's cruiser. They had left her Honda in Pine Valley, Frank insisting on driving them himself after Victoria's unexpected appearance raised security concerns. Tom followed in his truck, William's trunk secured once more under tarp and rope. Carson had already departed for Chicago, promising to send a car for them tomorrow morning. Bennett had arranged for secure temporary housing in a hotel suite, advising against returning to their apartment until proper security measures could be established. The magnitude of change compressed into a single day left Sarah feeling disoriented, as though she had stepped into someone else's life. 24 hours earlier, she had been a struggling single mother with overdue bills and a check engine light. Now she was discussing security details in board meetings, hotel suites, and asset transfers. Yet as they approached the glittering city skyline in the late afternoon sun, Sarah felt a curious sense of calm beneath the whirlwind of change. William's letter had provided more than just financial security. It had offered vindication. Her choice to keep Olivia, the decision that had cost her William's approval and support when she needed it most, had ultimately been the proof of character that earned his respect and trust. The $5 bill rested in her pocket, a tangible reminder of William's core message. Real wealth starts with courage, not capital. The audacity to solve problems others ignore. The strength to choose the hard right over the easy wrong. Frank navigated through increasing traffic, the urban density replacing rural openness. William came to see me about 3 months before he passed, asked a lot of questions about you, how you were doing, whether you seemed happy despite the struggles. Sarah shifted carefully to avoid waking Olivia. I didn't know you kept in touch with him about me. Frank's eyes remained on the road, but his voice carried a hint of regret. He asked me not to mention it, said he wasn't ready to reach out directly. Too much pride, I think. Too afraid you might reject him the way he rejected you. But he listened to every word when I told him how you were putting yourself through nursing school while raising Olivia, how you never complained, never asked for handouts. His eyes got misty, though he tried to hide it. The revelation that William had been secretly monitoring her life through Frank added another layer to Sarah's evolving understanding of her grandfather. His silence hadn't been complete indifference. He had been watching from a distance, perhaps looking for evidence that might justify changing his position without losing face. Sitting in Bennett's office that afternoon, Sarah had calculated that William must have written his letter and arranged his elaborate inheritance plans shortly after that conversation with Frank. The timing suggested that Frank's reports about her determination and resilience had been the final confirmation William needed to make his decision. As they pulled up to the hotel, a uniformed doorman immediately approached to assist with their luggage, limited to overnight essentials Tom had helped them purchase on the way, since returning to their apartment seemed unwise given Victoria's aggressive approach. The suite Bennett had arranged occupied an entire floor of the luxury hotel, with separate bedrooms, a fully stocked kitchen, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic city views. Olivia wandered from room to room in sleepy amazement, her fingers trailing over surfaces too expensive to exist in their normal world. Tom helped bring in William's toolbox and the portfolio of blueprints, declining the hotel's offer of porter service with a gruff insistence on handling these items personally. Once everything was settled, he and Frank prepared to depart, both promising to return in the morning to accompany Sarah to the Alpine Logistics meeting. At the door, Frank hesitated, his weathered face serious. Victoria won't be the last family member to approach you. Nathan is more calculating than she is, more patient. And Walter has banking connections that could create headaches if he chooses to be difficult. Sarah nodded, the weight of these complicated relationships settling on her shoulders alongside the responsibility of the inheritance. Bennett had already warned her about potential legal challenges, though he remained confident that William's arrangements would withstand scrutiny. After their departures, Sarah ordered room service, another novelty that Olivia approached with wide-eyed wonder. As they ate dinner beside the wall of windows, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk, Olivia's questions tumbled out with childish directness. Are we rich now? Will I have to change schools? Can we get a dog? The rapid-fire inquiries about their new reality reflected the innocent practicality of childhood, reducing life-altering inheritance to concrete concerns about pets and friends. Sarah considered each question carefully, aware that her answers would shape Olivia's understanding of wealth and its meaning. Yes, we have money now, but having money isn't the same as being rich. Real richness comes from how we use what we have, not just how much we have. Remember what great-grandpa William wrote, "Wealth starts with courage, not capital." The conversation continued as they prepared for bed, Olivia struggling to reconcile this new reality with the only life she had known. In the unfamiliar luxury of the hotel suite, Sarah found herself thinking about William's community center plans, his vision for a place that would provide exactly the support she had needed as a young single mother. The blueprints seemed to offer a path forward through the bewildering landscape of sudden wealth, a purpose beyond mere financial security. William had given her not just money, but a blueprint, literal and metaphorical, for transforming that money into meaning. As Olivia finally drifted to sleep in the bedroom adjoining Sarah's, the events of the past 2 days replayed in Sarah's mind. The humiliation in the lawyer's office, the discovery in storage room 7, the revelations about William's secret business success, Victoria's ambush at the diner. Each piece added dimension to the inheritance puzzle, expanding it beyond simple financial transfer to something more complex and meaningful. Sarah's phone vibrated with an incoming text from an unknown number. The message contained only an image, a newspaper clipping from 20 years ago showing William standing proudly before Pine Valley Station. The caption identified him as local businessman William Miller, advocating for the preservation of historic railway architecture. No accompanying message explained who had sent this or why. Moments later, another text arrived from the same unknown number. Your grandfather changed many lives for the better. His legacy deserves to continue. JT. The mysterious communication added another thread to the increasingly complex tapestry of William's life and influence. Who was JT? Another business associate? Someone from the railway days? The message hinted at communities beyond family and business that had been touched by William's actions, widening the circle of his impact in ways Sarah was only beginning to discover. She moved to the suite's living area, spreading the community center blueprints across the coffee table. In the quiet luxury of the hotel room, surrounded by evidence of wealth she had never imagined possessing, Sarah found herself drawn not to thoughts of personal comfort, but to possibilities for purpose. The $5 bill and brass key lay beside the blueprints, humble objects that had unlocked extraordinary potential. Tomorrow would bring meetings with executives and lawyers, financial advisors, and wealth managers. But tonight, in this moment of transition between her old life and whatever came next, Sarah allowed herself to dream of possibilities. Not just what the money could buy, but what it could build. Not just how it might ease her own struggles, but how it might prevent others from facing similar ones. The inheritance wasn't just William's wealth, it was his vision, his values, his challenge to find problems that needed solving and have the audacity to believe she could fix them. Outside the window, the city pulsed with light and movement, millions of lives intersecting in complex patterns. Somewhere in that urban tapestry lay her old apartment with its overdue bills and uncertain future. Somewhere, too, lay Alpine Logistics headquarters, where tomorrow she would officially claim her inheritance. Between those points stretched a new path, undefined but full of possibility, challenging but rich with purpose. The path of someone who had inherited not just wealth, but responsibility. Not just resources, but resolve. William's final gift hadn't been the money. It had been the recognition that she possessed what truly mattered, the courage to make difficult choices, the perseverance to face their consequences, the strength to build something meaningful from whatever materials life provided. $5 or 18 million, the essential quality remained the same. As midnight approached, Sarah carefully refolded the blueprints, her decision crystallizing with quiet certainty. The money would change their lives, yes, but it wouldn't change who they were or what they valued. Tomorrow would begin the process of claiming her inheritance, not just the financial assets, but the deeper legacy William had left her. The challenge to transform possibility into purpose, wealth into worth, opportunity into impact. Outside the hotel window, a half-moon illuminated the sleeping city, its light falling equally on penthouses and project housing, on financial districts and forgotten neighborhoods. In that democratic moonlight, Sarah saw her inheritance not as an endpoint, but as a beginning, the first page of a new chapter William had made possible, but that she alone would author. The Alpine Logistics headquarters occupied an imposing glass tower in the city's financial district. Sarah stood in the marble-floored lobby, Olivia's hand in hers, surrounded by an unexpected support team. Frank in his best uniform, Tom in a freshly pressed shirt that couldn't quite disguise his working-class origins, Michael Bennett with his leather portfolio, and the enigmatic James Carson, who had arranged this meeting. For 20 years, wealth and power had flowed from this building, controlled by people who operated in realms Sarah had never encountered. Now she was stepping into that world, not as a supplicant, but as an owner, her grandfather's shares conferring a status she had never imagined possessing. The executive conference room on the 42nd floor overlooked the cityscape like a command center surveying its domain. 8 men and 3 women rose as Sarah entered, the board of directors for Alpine Logistics, their expressions ranging from curiosity to carefully masked apprehension. The chairman, Edwin Harris, extended his hand with practiced cordiality that failed to reach his calculating eyes. Sarah Miller, welcome to Alpine Logistics. William spoke of you occasionally, though he kept his personal life quite private. The board meeting proceeded with meticulous formality, legal documents confirming the transfer of William's shares, explanations of voting rights and dividend structures, presentations on the company's current operations and future projections. Olivia sat remarkably still, drawing quietly in a notebook Carson had thoughtfully provided, occasionally looking up to watch her mother's face. Most revealing were the subtle power dynamics evident in the director's behavior. Some clearly viewed Sarah as an inconvenience, a random heir thrust into their carefully balanced ecosystem. Others saw opportunity, a potentially malleable newcomer who might be guided towards supporting their agendas. None seemed to consider that William might have chosen her precisely because she would not be easily manipulated. As the formal business concluded, Harris clasped his hands on the polished table. Now, Ms. Miller, we typically recommend that new shareholders, particularly those who inherit their positions, arrange for professional representation on the board. I'd be happy to recommend several excellent financial managers who could vote your shares by proxy and handle all the technical details you'd rather not concern yourself with. The condescension was so perfectly packaged in helpful concern that Sarah might once have accepted it without question. But William's lessons echoed in her mind. His warning about those who had visited for the inheritance they assumed was coming, his philosophy of hiring good people and letting them work without micromanagement. Thank you, Mr. Harris, but I'll be representing my own interests. I may not have corporate experience, but I understand William's business philosophy and intend to honor it. I have no desire to micromanage operations. You clearly run a successful company. But I will attend quarterly meetings and vote my own shares. A ripple of recalculation passed around the table. This was not the deferential single mother they had anticipated. Carson's eyes crinkled with suppressed amusement, while Bennett made a small notation in his portfolio. The meeting adjourned with artificial pleasantries, directors filing out with sidelong glances at the unexpected heiress. Only Carson remained, along with a woman who had sat quietly at the far end of the table, Diana Martinez, introduced as Chief Financial Officer. She approached Sarah with direct professionalism. William always said the true measure of a business wasn't its profits, but its impact. He never interfered with operations, but he kept us honest about our purpose. If you're even half as perceptive as he was, Alpine will be in good hands. The acknowledgement of William's deeper business philosophy, so at odds with his rigid personal stance, further complicated Sarah's evolving understanding of her grandfather. The man who had built this corporate legacy appeared increasingly different from the unyielding patriarch who had rejected her choice to keep Olivia. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of practical changes. On Bennett's advice, Sarah secured a modest but comfortable house in a good school district, a deliberate middle path between continuing their cramped apartment existence and leaping into ostentatious luxury. She completed her nursing degree, insisting on finishing what she'd started despite no longer needing the career for financial reasons. Security concerns materialized exactly as Frank had predicted. Nathan appeared at her new home unannounced, his real estate developer's smile masking calculating eyes. Sarah, we're family. All this legal maneuvering isn't necessary between blood relations. Surely we can come to a more equitable arrangement regarding grandfather's estate. Sarah maintained firm boundaries, redirecting all financial discussions to Bennett while keeping personal interactions cordial but limited. With each polite refusal, Nathan's facade cracked further, revealing the entitlement beneath. Eleanor arrived next, wielding guilt rather than charm. William would have wanted his estate shared among family, not concentrated in inexperienced hands. After all I did for him in his final years, confined to that small house, sacrificing my comfort to provide care. The martyrdom performance would once have affected Sarah deeply. Now she recognized it as emotional manipulation, a tactic Eleanor had likely used on William himself during those years she'd sacrificed living in his mortgage-free home while positioning herself for inheritance. Walter's approach proved most troubling. Rather than direct confrontation, he attempted to interfere with the asset transfer through banking connections, raising questions about William's competency when he'd established the trust, suggesting improper influence. Bennett countered each maneuver with calm legal precision, but the underhanded tactics revealed the depths to which family would sink for financial gain. Through these confrontations, Sarah found strength in William's letter, carrying it with her as a talisman of validation. His words, people who choose the hard right over the easy wrong, guided her responses to family pressure. She neither lashed out in righteous anger nor capitulated to unreasonable demands. Each interaction confirmed William's judgment. She alone among his relatives valued relationships over money, principle over convenience. 6 months after discovering William's trunk, Sarah stood once more outside Pine Valley Station. This time, no chain-link fence surrounded the property. No trespassing signs warned visitors away. The brick exterior gleamed, restored to its original glory, windows replaced, roof repaired. Frank and Tom flanked her like proud sentinels as county officials gathered for the property transfer ceremony. The station purchase had required delicate negotiations. Despite decades of neglect, the county suddenly discovered historical significance when Sarah expressed interest in buying the abandoned building. Frank's influence as police chief and Carson's corporate connections finally overcame bureaucratic resistance, though at a significantly higher price than the dilapidated structure should have commanded. Sarah cared little about the inflated cost. What mattered was fulfilling William's vision, transforming the station into the community center he had meticulously planned 20 years earlier. She had followed his blueprints precisely, honoring his original concept while updating facilities to meet current needs. The restoration process had revitalized more than just the building. Local contractors found steady work for months. Tom supervised the carpentry, training 3 young apprentices in traditional woodworking techniques. Frank coordinated security upgrades, ensuring the building that had once been a teenage hangout would now provide safe space for community programs. Inside, the transformation proved even more dramatic. The grand waiting room now served as a multi-purpose community space, its high ceiling and restored moldings creating an atmosphere of dignified possibility. William's office had become a resource center for single parents, offering practical assistance with childcare, job searches, and educational opportunities. The upper floor, once administrative space for railway operations, now housed classrooms and computer labs. The former baggage area had been converted into a daycare center. New construction extended from the rear of the original building, providing additional program space while maintaining the historical facade. As Sarah conducted the first unofficial tour for Frank, Tom, and Olivia, each space revealed thoughtful details drawn directly from William's plans. Accessibility features beyond what codes required, soundproofing between learning areas, flexible furniture systems that could adapt to different needs. Tom ran his hand along a restored wooden banister, craftsmanship gleaming under fresh varnish. Will would have loved seeing this. He always said this building had good bones, just needed someone who understood its value. Sarah paused in what had once been Storage Room 7, now transformed into a small museum preserving the station's history. William's trunk occupied a place of honor, its contents protected behind glass. The journals and documents that told the story of Pine Valley Transit Solutions and William Miller's business legacy. Beside the trunk, in a simple frame, hung the $5 bill and brass key, accompanied by a plaque explaining their significance. Not their monetary value, but the lesson they represented, that real wealth begins with courage. That value often hides in plain sight, waiting for someone curious enough to look beyond surface appearances. The official opening ceremony for the Pine Valley Community Center occurred on a crisp October morning, exactly 2 years after William's death. Sarah stood on the platform where trains had once arrived and departed, looking out at the gathered crowd that far exceeded her expectations. Local residents filled the restored benches, curiosity and cautious optimism evident in their expressions. County officials claimed prominent positions, some of the same bureaucrats who had resisted selling the building now eager to associate themselves with its rebirth. Most surprisingly, a contingent of Alpine Logistics employees had arrived from Chicago, led by Carson and Diana Martinez, demonstrating corporate support for their founder's legacy project. Sarah approached the microphone with Olivia beside her, the 10-year-old's presence a living embodiment of the choice that had once divided Sarah from William and now defined her inheritance of his values. 2 years ago, I sat in a lawyer's office while my grandfather's will was read. My cousins received houses and investments and trust funds. I received this. Sarah held up a replica of the brass key. My family laughed at what seemed like a final insult from a disappointed grandfather. But that key unlocked not just a storage room, but a legacy, not just wealth, but wisdom. She explained the journey from humiliation to discovery, from rejection to reconciliation, from inheritance to purpose. As she spoke, she watched understanding dawn in different ways across diverse faces. Recognition from the older residents who had known William, inspiration from struggling parents who saw hope in the center's services, calculation from officials measuring potential political benefits. This community center exists because William Miller believed in solving problems others ignored. He saw inefficient railway routes and built a business connecting overlooked communities. He saw this abandoned station and envisioned a place that could serve those who needed support most, particularly single parents facing the challenges I once faced myself. The speech concluded with a direct connection to William's core philosophy. Real wealth isn't measured by what we possess, but by problems we solve and lives we improve. The Pine Valley Community Center isn't just a building, it's a challenge. A challenge to see value where others see only cost, to find solutions where others see only obstacles, to build connections where distance has grown. As Sarah cut the ceremonial ribbon across the station's restored main entrance, she felt William's presence not as a ghostly observer, but as a thread of continuity, values and vision extending beyond individual lifespans, lessons transmitted despite human imperfection and temporary estrangement. The center's impact manifested immediately. Within months, the GED preparation program had enrolled 35 adults seeking to complete their education. The childcare program allowed 15 single parents to accept jobs they would otherwise have had to decline. The computer lab provided technology access to residents who had been functionally excluded from the digital economy. 5 years after discovering her inheritance, Sarah sat in her modest office at the community center, reviewing quarterly reports. The Pine Valley Initiative had expanded beyond William's original vision, now offering medical and dental services, legal assistance for low-income residents, and a small business incubator supporting local entrepreneurs. Frank appeared in the doorway, his uniform exchanged for casual retirement clothes, but his bearing still unmistakably that of the authority figure he had been for decades. "Sarah, there's someone here you should meet." He ushered in a woman in her 30s, Jennifer Thompson, whose name triggered immediate recognition. Thompson, like James Thompson, one of William's original business partners from the Pine Valley Transit Solutions founding. Jennifer confirmed the connection immediately. "James Thompson was my grandfather. He passed last month, and while sorting his papers, I found correspondence with William Miller discussing the community center concept. Apparently, they had talked about it for years before William developed the actual plans." She produced yellowed letters dating from the 1980s, long before the station closed, in which William and James discussed creating a facility that would support rural families through changing economic conditions. The vision had roots deeper than Sarah had realized, extending back to when her own mother was young. The revelation altered Sarah's understanding once again. William's community center plans weren't merely a response to her situation as a single mother. They represented a long-held commitment to addressing systemic challenges facing families like hers, a commitment he had maintained even while personally rejecting her choice. The contradiction felt less jarring now. Human complexity had become familiar territory as Sarah navigated her own evolving roles: inheritor of wealth, community builder, mother of a growing daughter, connector between urban resources and rural needs. People could simultaneously hold opposing impulses: judgment and compassion, rigidity and vision, personal disappointment and systemic concern. 10 years after William's death, the Pine Valley Community Center had become a model studied by rural development experts. Sarah had established a foundation ensuring its financial sustainability independent of her personal oversight. The success inspired similar transformations in neighboring communities. Abandoned buildings repurposed as service centers, connecting points between resources and needs. Olivia, now 18, had developed her own relationship with William's legacy. Though she had never met her great-grandfather, she had absorbed his entrepreneurial spirit and practical problem-solving approach. Her college application essays centered on continuing the family tradition of identifying overlooked challenges and creating systemic solutions. Sarah's quarterly visits to Alpine Logistics had evolved from obligatory oversight to strategic partnership. The company now provided logistics training at multiple community centers, creating career pathways for rural residents while developing their own workforce. The corporate social responsibility program, once a marginal afterthought, had become central to the company's identity and recruitment success. On the 20th anniversary of William's death, Sarah organized a special commemoration at the center. The event honored not just William, but everyone connected to the station's transformation. from Frank and Tom, who had helped discover its secrets, to the staff and volunteers who had given the building new purpose. The gathering filled the former waiting room, now a vibrant community space hosting everything from senior dance classes to town hall meetings. Photographs lined the walls, historical images of the station in its railway days alongside documentation of its rebirth and impact. Williams' toolbox, restored and functional, had become the center's symbol, painted on the building's sign and embroidered on staff shirts. Sarah stood at the podium, 20 years of purpose evident in her confident posture, so different from the uncertain young mother who had once clutched an envelope containing $5 and a key. When wealth comes unexpectedly, it reveals character rather than creating it. Money is merely a magnifier, making us more of whatever we already are. She surveyed the assembled community, from Alpine Logistics executives to GED students, from Frank and Tom in places of honor to Jennifer Thompson, representing the interconnected legacies of Williams' business partners. 20 years ago, I thought inheritance meant receiving something from the past. Now I understand it means building something for the future. William Miller didn't leave me his money. He left me his mission. And that has made all the difference. The commemoration concluded with the announcement of a major expansion, the William Miller Rural Innovation Network, connecting 10 community centers across 3 states. The initiative would transform the impact from local improvement to regional renaissance, creating opportunities in communities long overlooked by a traditional economic development. After the commemoration ceremony, Sarah and Olivia stood on the rooftop terrace of the center, looking down at the square where Pine Valley residents were connecting, conversing, and building community. The sunset cast a warm orange glow over the town, illuminating the windows of newly opened shops along Main Street, transforming once abandoned buildings into gleaming jewels. At 28, Olivia had become a younger version of William, combining his practical toughness with her mother's compassion. With an MBA focused on social enterprise, she was now leading the expansion of their community center network into Appalachia, where former coal-dependent towns struggled to find new paths forward. Besides Sarah, Olivia held a thick folder, her latest proposal to the Miller-Thompson Foundation, the collaborative funding organization created by the 2 families who founded Pine Valley Transit. The document bore the title, Logistics of Opportunity, Connecting Rural America. It was the unlikely reunion no one had anticipated. 2 business partner families reunited after 2 generations. Following James Thompson's death, Jennifer had approached Sarah with documents about the men's shared past, not just letters about the community center, but plans for a joint support fund they never had time to implement. Jennifer and Sarah had brought that idea to life, creating an organization far more powerful than William and James had ever dreamed possible. Olivia placed her hand on her mother's shoulder, now streaked with silver. 20 years of doing the right thing had left its mark. "Mom, I found this in the company archives while researching materials." She produced a faded photograph. Sarah looked at the image, a warmth spreading through her chest. It showed William and James, both much younger, standing in front of Pine Valley Transit's first truck in '94. On the bow, William had written, "First year of profit, proof they were wrong about these routes not being worth serving." "We've continued their fight, haven't we?" as Olivia said, her voice rich with pride. "Finding value where others see only cost, building connections where distance has grown." Sarah nodded, arm around her daughter's shoulders. Next week's Alpine Logistics Board meeting would decide on expanding their logistics training program to 3 new states, a program Sarah and Olivia had developed together, creating a pathway to transportation industry jobs for those previously without access. A bell rang from the restored station clock, now the center's iconic timepiece. Below, Jennifer Thompson was gathering a group of college students from across the country, participants in the summer program on sustainable community development. This year's class included Nathan's son, a nephew Sarah had never met until 8 months ago. When the boy knocked on her office door, determined to learn about the family legacy his father had overlooked, a young staff member stepped onto the terrace. "Mrs. Miller, there's an issue with the heating system in the East Wing. They say they need you to check it." Sarah smiled. "The toolbox is still in my office. Tell them I'll be right down." Olivia watched her mother with a mixture of amazement and admiration. 20 years and $18 million later, and you're still fixing pipes yourself? Sarah picked up William's old toolbox, meticulously restored and maintained, still containing many original tools. "If you understand how something works, you're never helpless when it breaks," she quoted William, then descended the stairs. Olivia stood alone on the rooftop, watching the last sunlight disappear behind the hills. Tonight, she would finalize her plans for the 11th Community Center, a new facility in a neighboring county where factory closures had left a community struggling for direction. In her coat pocket, she carried an old $5 bill encased in acrylic, a gift from Sarah on her college graduation day. Below, Sarah had just finished fixing the heating system and paused to observe an evening GED class. The teacher, a former program graduate, was writing on the board words that William had displayed in his station office decades earlier. "Find a problem that needs solving and have the audacity to believe you can fix it." Sarah smiled. In an uncertain world, that was the one thing she could trust absolutely. That the true value of any inheritance lies not in what we receive, but in what we build with it. And this legacy would continue far beyond both Sarah and Olivia, spreading in ways that William would surely be proud of, but could never have imagined, proving once again that the truth about wealth isn't measured by how large it grows, but by how far it reaches.